So I'm in the middle of reviewing contracts for a bunch of projects that I am taking over. And I realized that it might not be super clear what the difference between a contract and a scope of work is. Mainly because this week I've referred to the contract several times and someone brings up the scope of work instead of the actual contract. So for this video, I want to quickly go through what is the difference between a contract of a project and the scope of work of a project. First off, the scope of work is part of the contract, but it is not the whole contract. A contract kind of defines how you're going to work with your client. The scope of work is what you're actually going to deliver for that client. So the scope of work usually comes as an attachment to the contract or an exhibit to the contract. And the contract might say something to the effect of, for example, in my industry, it might say something like, company to deliver engineering and design services for X client. See Exhibit A for scope of work. That's what's in the contract. That little sentence or little paragraph on describing what it is that you're going to deliver or what it is that you're going to provide to your client. But it is not the scope of work. The scope of work is an attachment that then says the exact details of what it is that you're going to deliver to the client. The contract is this legal document that for me has been really hard to learn how to read because it's a bunch of legal jargon. What it really tells you is what kind of contract are you going to be working under? Is it going to be a fixed price contract? Is it going to be a cost and materials contract? How are you going to get paid for your services? So all the payment terms, how much, when, during milestones, at every deliverable, or is it going to be monthly? How are you going to get paid? Do I have to invoice them? And how are they expecting that invoice? Am I providing an invoice to a client in a specific format? How are we expected to get paid? Contract is also going to be really strict about schedules and milestones because that's really important when it comes to defining whether you are delivering what you're saying you're going to deliver in a contract or in a project. The contract is also going to define the deliverables and your performance standard, which are essentially what are the requirements out of what you're delivering? What's the level of quality that you're going to be delivering something? Again, for example, in my industry, it would tell you that you would have to comply to a certain set of guidelines or design criteria or whatever it is that they're going to be able to compare your design to that specific standard. And then your contract is also going to have all the terms for changes and disputes and termination. So if you do not deliver what you say you're going to deliver, the contract is going to say how the client can get out of this contract because you aren't delivering. And it'll also have terms for your client. What is expected out of your client? Obviously, payment. If they don't pay on time or if they're not paying you, you can stop work, for example. So all of those things will be defined within your contract. It'll also have a lot about warranties and insurances and liabilities, which are essentially all the legal protections that are going to protect your company, yourself, and the client as well. What kind of insurance is expected? What kind of warranties are you giving your client? What kind of insurances are expected if something happens? For example, if you have a project where, I don't know, equipment gets stolen, and what kind of warranties are you giving your client? Which is essentially a promise that you're making them that whatever product you're going to deliver to them is going to meet those standards that you had defined previously. Or if it doesn't meet those standards, that you're going to fix it on your own dime. So a contract really exists to protect both parties, to protect the client and protect you as the service provider. It's legally and financially enforceable, which means if something goes wrong, it doesn't matter what happened in the project or if there were, handshakes or if you were working at risks, all that the lawyers are going to look at is that contract. If things weren't put in writing, all that matters in a court is that contract. And then, yes, of course, that scope of work is part of your contract as an exhibit, but it functions as the detailed description of what it is that you're going to deliver to your client. It doesn't really have any legal jargon. So for example, in my industry, I'll have my contract and then I'll have my scope of work. And the scope of work is usually written by the engineers. So I always have a much easier time reading the scope of work. And the contract obviously is written by the people in procurement, legal, all of those. You get to read it as the project manager and ensure that, yeah, it makes sense and that's what you and the client are agreeing to. However, As the project manager and your subject matter experts, you're probably not writing a lot of it. You're probably writing a lot of the scope, though, telling them exactly what kind of engineering you're going to provide, what kind of deliverables are needed, how are those deliverables going to be put together, and of course, what is not included in the scope. What are your boundaries? Sometimes you also include assumptions and exclusions in a scope of work because sometimes you need to do assumptions early on in the project in order to define your scope of work, and then those assumptions are defined later on. So essentially, a scope of work is the work itself. It's the blueprint of what you're going to deliver to your client, how it's going to be provided to them, what kind of subject matter experts you're going to need, and what the project team is actually going to produce step by step to deliver those contract requirements that are in the actual contract. So in short, a contract are the rules of the relationship between you and your client. It defines all the legal, the financial, the schedule, and your obligations. A scope of work is the work that actually gets done. It's the description of the work that the engineers are actually going to produce, all the tasks that need to happen, all the deliverables that are going to be provided. That's what's in the scope of work. All right, that's it. If you want to learn more about scopes and defining scopes and producing scopes, go check out my project management playlist. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye, everyone.